Backcountry.church, welcome to the fifth and final episode of the series on the life and times of David. Man, after this episode airs, you can binge watch and encourage you to share the link to the whole series. Hope it's been a blessing to you and that you can share your insights and thoughts on it wherever you happen to be sharing those, whether it's texting a person or social media and so on. But we're going to jump right into the message. I want to tell you that I was at Badlands National Park in the wonderful state of South Dakota, and it was so windy. They had a windstorm there. I think they averaged like 30-mile-an-hour sustained winds the entire time I was there, with gusts up to 50 and 60 miles an hour. So I couldn't exactly record this there. But anyways, right after this episode, I'm going to show you around. By the way, one brand new exciting feature we have is our podcasts are now on YouTube podcasts. This series we've been on YouTube, but now we're both on the video section and the podcast section. So check us out there. Well, let's jump into episode 5 of the series on David. And let me just say that everybody, including you and me, everybody needs hopes and dreams. Everybody. But as you know, life rarely goes the way you think it's going to go. Oh, if only I had, if only I could, and so on. Whether it's relational issues, money issues, physical, medical issues, and so on. Life rarely ever goes the way we think it's gonna go. Surprise, surprise, right? But I'm gonna give you a couple really cool examples, and maybe you've heard this before. Walt Disney. Walt Disney was turned down 302 times before getting his financing for the Walt Disney World. Now, as of this year, 58 million people will visit that park this year. But he was turned down 302 times. Before publishing his first book, Stephen King was ready to give up his writing career. After getting 30 rejections notices, he threw his first novel in the trash. But his wonderful wife retrieved it and urged him to keep going. He has since gone on to sell, you ready for this? 400 million copies of his books, most of which have, of course, been made into major motion pictures. There's a breaking point for all of us. You keep trying, you keep trying, you keep going, and rejection after rejection, or wall after wall. It's hard. It's tough, very tough. But as you know, plans are great, but reality is actually greater, and not always in a good way. I remember visiting Hershey, the Hershey plant. You ever been there? Very cool place in Pennsylvania. Anyways, Milton Hershey started 3 candy companies as a young man, and all of them failed until he found success in the Hershey company. And of course, where I live, Steve Jobs and all his company, Wozniak, we call him Woz. Steve Jobs sold his car and Woz sold his calculator so they could scrap enough money together to build the prototype of a computer circuit board, which would later be known as Apple I. You may not have the opportunity to walk your daughter down the aisle. Perhaps a marriage has failed, or maybe that dream job turned out to be not so much a dream job. We think, well, God owes me, God's promised me. You behaved right, you did everything that you thought right, and still your dreams did not come true. And everybody else's seems to be coming true. I mean, social media, of course, everything you say there is the complete truth and nothing is, missing. We think, well, God granted somebody else is your wish. No. The question is what do we do when our dreams can't come true? What do we do when our dreams can't come true? And this is where we enter the life and times of David. You see, God promised David the throne. 22 years earlier, he becomes king over all Israel. And he's no longer the cool kid or the cool king. He's in his 50s. Oh my gosh. God forbid be in your 50s, right? Just kidding. He sends his men off to war. And of course, you have the whole Bathsheba story that occurs. You can read about that on your own. Well, 10 years later, the family is being punished. And Ammon, David's oldest son, and Tamar, that's his half-sister, there's an awful, awful story that occurs in it. I'll just say that he went into her and tried to rape her. He said, "No, my brother," she said to him, "don't force me. Such a thing should not be done in Israel. Don't do this wicked thing." But he refused to listen to her, and since he was stronger than she, he raped her. Then Ammon hated her with an intense hatred, and in fact, he hated her more than he had loved her. Ammon said to her, "Get up and get out." Now, this is an important setting of what occurs a little bit later on in our story. Well, David finds out what he did, what Ammon did, and he's furious, and he does absolutely nothing. Absalom, remember that name, Absalom, that's Tamar's brother, takes her in. So Absalom is David's third son. And Absalom did nothing for 2 years. And one day he throws a party for the king's sons, and he gets Absalom gets Ammon drunk. His men murder Ammon for what he did to Tamar. Absalom flees north to Syria. And what does King David do? King David does absolutely nothing. After 3 years, David invites Absalom back to Jerusalem, but refuses to see him. 2 years pass. Absalom is fed up. So he burns General Joab, his crops, to get his attention. Well, they finally meet, but Absalom is hurt. David never calls Absalom, and he plots to replace his father. So Absalom's going to put together a plan to replace his father as king. So he sets himself up as a judge at the kind of the part of the judicial system. It was that judges would be at the front gate and you could go hear your case met and so on. And so Absalom put himself there. And Absalom stole the hearts of the people. 4 years later, he puts things now in motion. So did you catch the timeline? So he set himself up as judge, and then now we're 4 years later. So King David is getting older. Then Absalom sent secret messages throughout the tribes of Israel to say, as soon as you hear the sound of the trumpets, then say, Absalom is king in Hebron. So 16 years, almost 2 decades, decade and a half, 16 years after the whole issue with Bathsheba, David's world unravels. His firstborn son is murdered by his favorite son, who instigates a civil war that threatens everything he builds. It's like a soap opera, drama, lots of drama, all because David did not obey God. A messenger came and told David, the hearts of the people of Israel are with Absalom. Then David said to all his officials who were with him in Jerusalem, come, we must flee, or none of us will escape from Absalom. We must leave immediately, or he will move quickly to overtake us and bring ruin on us and put the city to the sword. That's the city of Jerusalem. Well, David abandons the throne in the city. And once again, at the age of 61, he's now a fugitive. Again. Remember, he was a fugitive running from Saul? And then the next 8 years after that, against the other king that tried to slaughter him, now he's a fugitive once again. This is not his plan. This is not his dream. Once again, everything he had envisioned is gone. And there we are, brokenhearted, disappointed, angry, looking for someone to blame. Where's God? What's the point? Why even try? You hung in there for that girlfriend, boyfriend, or that relationship. Now this, and you waited. You raised your kids right. You worked hard. What you sow, we reap, right? I was honest, I lost the job. And this is when we make things worse. The first time David fled the kingdom, he took matters into his own hands, but he was a very different man at this time. Well, the story of David continues. The whole countryside wept aloud as all the people passed by. The king also crossed the Kidron Valley, and all the people moved on toward the wilderness. Zadok was there too, and all the Levites who were with them, carrying the Ark of the Covenant of God. And that, of course, represented the presence of God. Then the king, King David, said to Zadok, take the Ark of God back into the city of Jerusalem. Why did he say that? He said, if I find favor in the Lord's eyes, pause there, I'm not going to do my solutions or manipulate the situation. Remember what he did before in the second episode of this series? He's learned his lesson. He's not going to do that again. If I find favor in the Lord's eyes, he will bring me back and let me see it and his dwelling place again. But if he says, I am not pleased with you, then I'm ready. Let him do with me whatever seems good. David lost his world, but he did not lose his confidence in God. He's a very, very different person at this point. He chose not to abandon God. When it appeared, God chose to abandon him. I'm not going to war with you, David said. I'm not going to risk the city because it's not about me. That is a common theme throughout David's life. He knew that life wasn't about him. So Absalom comes and he takes Jerusalem without a fight. It's his. The hollow victory because David's still alive. David fled. And Absalom didn't kill him. Yet. Well, you have Ahithophel, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, possibly Bathsheba's grandfather. He had switched sides and he gave advice to Absalom. He said, don't rest until you kill David. Well, then you had Hushai. He left the city with David, went back and pretended to be an advisor and to give bad advice to Absalom. So we read these words. Hushai replied to Absalom, the advice Ahithophel, that's a hard word, has given is not good this time. You know your father and his men. They are fighters, as fierce as a wild bear robbed of her cubs. He might be 61, but let me tell you, don't let that fool you. Good advice for those in their 60s, by the way. He advised Absalom, gather all the tribes and lead the campaign yourself. So Absalom took his advice. Ahithophel knew all was lost. Giving David time to organize was a mistake. And Ahithophel went home and he hung himself because he knew his days were done. David hears Absalom is coming. David has no choice. He divided the army into thirds, gives them explicit instructions, very, very clear instructions. He said, "Be gentle with the young man Absalom." David, come on. "Be gentle with him for my sake." And all the troops heard the king give orders concerning Absalom to each of the commanders. So David's generals insist David remain behind, and he watches as they leave to confront Absalom. Well, the battle took place in the forest of Ephraim, where superior numbers mattered less, and experience and organization mattered more. Think of the redcoats and the early US settlers who were fighting the redcoats in the forest. There was a lot more British than there were Americans. They had everything except the strategy. Same thing in this battle. There, Israel's troops were routed by David's men, and the casualties that day were great. 20,000 men. 20,000 died that day. The battle spread out over the whole countryside, and the forest swallowed up more men that day than the sword. It's sort of like, I don't know, this kind of weird tree beard and the Ents from the Lord of the Rings. It's kind of more like the roots, the bogs, the low-hanging branches. So what happened? Absalom was riding and got caught and was butchered by Joab. His hair, Absalom's hair, got caught in one of the branches, and he couldn't get out. And Joab came and killed him. So Absalom's army disbands, and David heard about Absalom and mourned. And David returns to Jerusalem as king. 9 years later, he dies at the age of 70. Well, let me give you the main idea here. The foundation of our faith is not answered prayer or happily ever after endings, but God's faithfulness. The story's not about us, it's about Him. And God, great is your faithfulness. We're mistaken to assume that we're forsaken. We're not. Dreams that don't come true say nothing to the presence of God or His hand working. Not at all. In 2 Samuel, we read those words again. "If I find favor in the Lord's eyes, He will bring me back. Let Him do with me whatever seems good." Jesus prayed that same prayer, by the way, "Not my will, but yours be done." And we go back to what David wrote in Psalm 25 as a shepherd. "In you, Lord, I put my trust. My hope is in you all day long." God, thank you so much that you are faithful. And while we have dreams, you have plans. May we live life with that open hand, and you can do with it whatever you please, for great is your faithfulness. Father, for those who are hurting right now and struggling with these very words, I pray that you would encourage them, help them, allow their mind to change toward you, that you are faithful, God. May we encourage each other in the faith, I pray. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay, my friends, Badlands National Park, take a look. And if you'd like us to pray for you, shoot us a quick email at hello@backcountry.church, or you can go to our website and fill out that prayer form. But in the meantime, I hope you enjoy the beauty of what God has made in Badlands National Park. By the way, if you go to the Apple App Store or Google Play, download backcountry.church app. Join us there.